Hello, everyone. This is Doug Nelson, the president of BodyWork Associates, and I thought this just seemed like a really appropriate time to explore a little bit about the kind of the science of stress, and especially how that might pertain to the kind of world that we're living in right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we're all struggling with that, and it probably is more stress now than as a nation and we've ever experienced, and certainly in my lifetime. So let's explore just a couple of things. I hope you find this useful. Three things generally make stress more difficult. Those three factors are unpredictability, a sense of loss of control, and the lack of a clear time frame. And as you might imagine, this virus plays perfectly into all three of those factors. Unpredictability, a sense of loss of control, certainly, and then no clear frame of this is when it's going to end. I think having that time frame, we can all endure things when we know I just have to put up with this for this amount of time. When things are unclear that way, it makes it much harder to process and deal with. So in stress, it's that unremitting kind of stress that is much more difficult than a clear time frame. So just also fear is a very interesting thing. I mean, fear is a very healthy response to threat, and it teaches us, we learn from fear. It's perfectly appropriate. That's very different in a way than what anxiety is, because fear is a very specific response. I have a fear of, whatever. I have a fear of snakes. I have a fear. It's something very specific. Anxiety is different in that way, in that anxiety is non-specific. It's generalized. And in some cases, there's so much stuff you're not even sure what you're afraid of. You just know, oh my goodness, it's like overwhelming and they're out there. Anxiety is much more devastating to the nervous system than fear is because of that lack of specificity. And one of the interesting things with anxiety is, as a little different than fear, is that just in the science world, anxiety tends to shut down what's called the prefrontal cortex. It's our sense of executive control. It's that decision-making part of your brain. And so when you're under great anxiety, you tend not to make really good decisions because that part of your brain is kind of in the offline mode. And so I think we've all had experiences of this in our own life. And I think now we see that same experience playing out as a nation. When you have these demands and this anxiety, it just sucks the bandwidth out of you. So, we only have so much information that we can process cognitively. And when you're thinking about this kind of stuff constantly, as this kind of unremitting stress can do, it really does take over our cognitive resources. And that is indeed a problem. And it really affects our kind of long-term planning and fully thinking through any of the consequences of actions that we take. And, the rush on toilet paper is a pretty good example of this, and I think one of the things that we all need to be a little careful about is, we're careful about spreading the virus, and that's really important. But you can also, as somebody said, sneeze on somebody else's social media. So, the more, as an adaptive thing, you're in the grocery store and you see everybody running for the toilet paper aisle and you think, I don't know, maybe I should think about this. It just kind of feeds on itself. And that's probably not a good thing when we have anxiety at a sort of a sociological level as well. So I think stepping back and being a little more thoughtful, a little more careful about this is a really important step, not to get lost in that. And there are times really just to step away from especially social media kinds of things. There is a way, in one way, if stress, and certainly my research and writing and pain in general, it tends to hijack our resources. For instance, in pain research, acute pain will occupy about 5% of various brain regions, the activity level of that. In chronic pain, it can hijack as much as 25% of those same brain regions. So that's an enormous amount of your brain's capacity that is, again, hijacked to process stuff about pain or stuff about stress. If somebody hijacks it, let's just hijack it back. And there are several ways, in fact, that you could do that. So here's one way. If it's hijacking your attention and your sort of prefrontal cognitive control executive function, you can hijack it back by saying, okay, for the next 3 minutes, I am just going to focus on my breath. And I know it sounds really simple, but breath is one of those interesting things that it's voluntary and it's involuntary. You can decide to hold your breath, and good luck with that, because you can hold it for so long and then nature will just take over. But it is that window in between voluntary and involuntary. So to control it actually has some really interesting effects on the brain. Maybe I'll go into this on another point, but to inhale, for instance, for a count of 4, and then exhale for a count of 7. Like inhale for 4, hold it for a little bit of time, and then exhale almost twice as long as you inhale, and just say, I'm going to do that for 3 minutes, is a really cool way of hijacking those resources back to a felt sense. And it's what's called interoception, your sense of yourself. Really important thing to do. It doesn't take very long to just kind of change your whole chemistry and your whole experience of yourself. Another simple thing that you could do, and this works for some people, I do less well with this, but monitoring your own pulse and just paying attention to the beating of your own heart. Again, both of these things are interoceptive, and another way to do this is just standing and taking your shoes off and feeling the sensation of your feet on the floor, and just paying close attention to how your movements, as you stand, you're swaying just ever so slightly, and your brain is making little adaptive motions. All those things will bring you back to you. And that is this process of interoception, which really has an interesting and a very positive effect on stress in a really cool way. One of the things that I would also say is about predictability. There have been just a boatload of studies on stress and predictability. And in laboratory rats, we can't talk about science unless we bring rats into this. And for rats, if you want to increase their stress level, you just make the stressor completely unpredictable. If you shock these rats at at completely predictable periods of time, they adapt to that pretty quickly. They're just like, oh, well, there it is again. But if you make it completely unpredictable, that just sends their stress level through the roof. So, and it's also interesting, in the bombing of London during World War II, there were areas of London that were bombed on an absolutely regular basis. And that was mostly in the center of London. On the kind of the outskirts, they were bombed at a very intermittent rate, not the consistent bombing that happened at the center of London. It may not surprise you that the people in the outlying areas suffered much more stress than the consistent bombing at the center. Fascinating. So, okay, I just had to throw this in there. I think that's just really, really funny. So I'll let you enjoy that for a second. So I would say one of the things about predictability is that sense of accomplishment and control. So now that we're all stuck at home, pick some tasks that you can just check off the list, so you feel like you have some sense of control over your life, whatever that might be. I've certainly got a few things on that list that always get pushed to the back. And while I'm stuck at home too, I'm trying to work through that list and also build some things for the future, and do things like this, actually, that make me feel like I'm connecting with you and being of use to everybody. So be well, be safe. I hope this gives you some insight into stress and how that plays into this whole thing, and that you can find ways to make it useful. Spend some time, just short periods of time, but in interoception and connecting with yourself. I mean, that will really help the stress level. Be careful with social contagion. That sometimes you just need to step away from the news. It's good to be informed, but not to be overwhelmed. And then also start, working through some tasks and clicking on that list and feeling like, yeah, I'm at least doing something here. So be well, be safe. And from all of us, from myself, from my staff at BodyWork Associates, we can't wait to connect with you again and see you at the office. So thank you, everyone.